The Peace and Social Concerns Committee of Ottawa Quakers would like to acknowledge that this event is taking place in our meeting house on the unceded land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. Their territory is the vast and expansive watershed of the Great Kitchissippi River, also known as the Ottawa River. The Algonquin people have lived on this land since beyond the reach of memory, record, or tradition. When settlers began to paddle through Algonquin territory, the Algonquin people negotiated treaties, first with the French and then with the English, that determined alliances and trade agreements between sovereign nations. As a community, we have attended to the Truth and Reconciliation calls to actions and advocated to implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Canada. We also recognize that we have a responsibility to care for the land on which we reside. This is the beginning of our journey of truth, reconciliation, and healing. We hope that this panel discussion today will help to give us all new understandings that will enable us to live in a good way.
Thank you, Judith. That was lovely. All right, so welcome everyone on Zoom and also in the physical space of our meeting house to a forum, an exciting forum. I can feel the energy coming from you all. So is nuclear energy a smart climate option? Question mark. We have as speakers Gordon Edwards. We had a little discussion, Gordon and I, about the first time I heard him speak, and it was rather embarrassing a long time ago. We have Dale York and Angela Bishop, and on Zoom we have Candace Paul. And Angela Bishop is going to speak with us first. Angela is the director of the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, small but mighty group, aiming to move Ontario onto a 100% renewable path. She has worked with the environmental non-for-profit sector for more than 3 decades in 4 Canadian cities, in issues ranging from eco-cities, transportation, climate, mental health, and elections. She also practices and teaches yoga, commutes daily by bike, and cares for her aging mother. Angela.
Thank you. And thank you to the Friends for hosting this event. So all of us here, and many in the room as well, we're part of a national coalition of 120 groups that are opposed to government funding for SMRs, or small modular nuclear reactors. We all believe that SMRs are a dirty, dangerous distraction from real climate action. My organization, the Clean Air Alliance, is committed to moving Ontario to a 100% renewable electricity grid. We focus on the financial implications of new nuclear, while other groups in our coalition address issues of health, waste, and weapons proliferation. 10 of our groups from Saskatchewan to New Brunswick are here in Ottawa this week for the Not the Nuclear Lobby, to meet with MPs or members of parliament to share with them what they're not hearing from the nuclear lobby, that SMRs are a false and costly detour from real climate action. So the big picture is the nuclear industry worldwide is tanking. In the 90s, the world got 17% of its power from nuclear. Today, it's under 10% and it's declining. And that's because the majority of the world's reactors, just over 400, were built in the 70s and 80s. And then Chernobyl blew in 1986, which was, the anniversary was yesterday, the 37th anniversary, and that's in Ukraine. And it sent radioactive particles all around the globe and contaminated much of Europe. That stopped new reactor sales. And now most of those reactors that were built in the 70s and 80s are being retired and replaced with much lower cost, safer, renewable power. And then in 2011, Fukushima blew in Japan. That was a triple meltdown. And that ended new reactor sales again, with the exception of some being built in China and India. Germany, for example, after Fukushima, committed to phasing out all 22 of their nukes. And last Saturday, the last 3 reactors closed. Germany is building out wind and solar. Half of this is community owned. And they're committed to phasing out coal by 2038. In the face of this declining global market share, the nuclear industry is now desperate for a new market. And Canada has come to the rescue by inviting US and UK nuclear companies to build their experimental technology here. I guess we've given up on our can-do technology, yet we want to stay in the nuclear game. So Alberta hopes to extract bitumen in the tar sands with a US SMR. Saskatchewan hopes to keep their uranium industry afloat with a US-Japanese reactor. Ontario plans to build up to 4 US-Japanese reactors just east of Toronto. New Brunswick hopes to build 1 US and 1 UK reactor, both which will rely on plutonium extraction. Now keep in mind that the most toxic places on Earth are places where they've extracted plutonium. That's Hanford in the US, Sellafield in the UK, and La Hague in France. Already $100 million has gone to these foreign companies from the federal government to bring their untested reactors to Canada. And another $970 million was given to OPG, Ontario Power Generation, from the Canadian Infrastructure Bank in the form of a low-interest loan to build their first SMR. If it's ever completed, this will be the first grid-connected SMR in the world. All these chosen reactors we're talking about inviting to Canada from around the world, they're all different. And none have ever been built anywhere in the world. They're all PowerPoint reactors, meaning they're just on paper. They're just paper designs. And all are expected to siphon billions of tax dollars and take more than a decade to build, if ever they come online. Now, on top of these provincial projects, the feds are also building an SMR research facility for foreign entities, as well as the infamous SNC-Lavalin, just upstream from Ottawa at Chalk River. This nuclear consortium has already received more than $1 billion for 10 years. The contract is $1 billion for 10 years, and another $1 billion for the research facility that they're building, all courtesy of federal taxpayers. This is just the start. All these promised reactors will produce deadly radioactive waste, including plutonium, which will need to be isolated from the environment for 1 million years, as stated by the industry itself. And by the way, no country in the world has yet solved how to isolate or neutralize nuclear fuel waste. The best the industry can come up with is to dig a big hole on First Nation land, dump the waste in, abandon it, and hope it doesn't leak anytime soon. This is the proposal of the Canadian nuclear industry that they put forward for all of Canada's nuclear fuel waste. And they're wooing communities in the northwest of Ontario between Dryden and Ignace, as well as the Teeswater area in southern Ontario, with millions of dollars in gifts. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is going renewable. Already, 16 countries are powered with 100% renewable power. Iceland, Norway, Costa Rica, Paraguay, and 62 more countries are committed to 100% renewable power. The International Energy Agency said that 95% of new supply over the next 5 years will come from renewable power. The world will spend $1 trillion on renewables this year alone. The market is what's driving this transition. Renewables cost a fraction of the cost of new nuclear. According to Lazard, a large financial advisory and assessment management company, wind and solar cost 3 to 4 times less than new nuclear. And also according to Lazard, who are investing in these projects, wind and solar can be rolled out in 1 year, whereas nuclear will take minimum 10 to 15 years. So why on earth is Canada focusing on nuclear rather than renewables and efficiency? So let's look at Ontario. The Doug Ford government, after being elected in 2018, first thing he did, canceled 758 wind and solar projects, cut the conservation budget by 60%, is now discontinuing a contract with Quebec for low-cost renewable water power and storage. And instead, he's building one, maybe more, experimental high-cost foreign SMRs. Sorry, building those. He's rebuilding 10 of our aging nuclear reactors at very high cost. And believe it or not, he's ramping up gas power 700%. So we're in the middle of a climate crisis and he's ramping up gas. So why does our conservative government hate renewables and love gas and nuclear? Well, they seem to, I guess, have an ideological hate on for renewables. Perhaps they think green energy is a lefty elite idea, despite it being the most economical choice. But also the Ford government is choosing to support the country's largest gas and nuclear companies. Enbridge Gas, TC Energy, Cameco, Bruce Power, and OPG. See, the Ford government's not representing the environment in these decisions, or consumers or taxpayers or future generations that will be left with the warming climate and deadly waste. And we're in a climate crisis. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world's climate scientists, spent 7 years researching what's happening with the climate. They just 3 weeks ago came out with their most recent report that said we need to reduce climate warming emissions by 50% by 2030. That means we must cut our emissions by half in 7 years. No matter how much money we throw at experimental new nuclear reactors, they're not going to make a dent at helping us reduce our climate emissions in the next decade or ever. In fact, they're going to make it worse because we'll continue burning gas and coal while we wait for those nukes to come online. It's just eco-insanity and intergenerational injustice. We all need to ask our federal and provincial politicians across the country, why are they choosing the highest cost, slowest options to meeting our electricity needs? We all need to engage in this issue now before billions more are spent going down this wasteful radioactive rabbit hole. SMRs are a false climate solution, a dirty, dangerous, high-cost distraction from real climate action. Thank you.
We will call now on Candace Paul to join us via Zoom. Where are you?
There she is.
There she is.
Disappeared for a second.
I get to introduce you in my mellifluous voice. Candace Paul is a member of the English River First Nation, where she lives on the Plage Reserve. She spent many years living and learning traditional Northern culture, which she is passing on to the next generation through her educational work. She has an honors diploma in architectural technology from the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, and has taken on the role recently of emergency management team coordinator for the English River First Nation. When her community became a target of the Nuclear Waste Management Organization on a proposal to store high-level nuclear waste in her family's territory, she became an outreach coordinator for the Committee for Future Generations. She has served as a board member with Interchurch Uranium Committee Education Cooperative, where she advocates successfully for increased representation for Indigenous participants. We welcome Candace and are anxious to hear what you have to say.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you, friends, for having invited me to speak at this panel. As a person who lives on a First Nation in Northern Saskatchewan, and it's a Dene First Nation, and all of the Athabasca Basin is Dene territory. And all of the Athabasca Basin is under exploration and has all of the uranium mining that takes place currently in Canada on it. And currently there's 3 mines operating: MacArthur River, Cigar Lake, and McLean Lake. And Rabbit Lake is in hold position because it's pretty much been mined out. However, right now, there's exploration happening all over our territory. The government of Saskatchewan gives out leases. We have 30 days to respond, and there's multiple leases at a time. There's right now, our band is looking at almost 30 leases and exploration permits that the government of Saskatchewan has already pre-approved. And one of the things they always say is it's going to have very low impact on our treaty hunting and fishing rights. It doesn't say anything about our land. It says our rights, and that is an issue. The rights are protected, but they're moot without land. So once these exploration companies come in, they start to impact the land immediately. They're drilling all over the place. Government of Saskatchewan doesn't have enough inspectors to actually inspect whether they're doing it properly, and neither does Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission.
Okay.
We've had uranium mining in Northern Saskatchewan since 1950 something, 52, I think. And that was initially during the Cold War to supply the United States, UK, etc., with uranium for nuclear weapons. There are over 40 abandoned uranium mine sites in Northern Saskatchewan. Many of them were never cleaned up properly. The government of Saskatchewan had made an agreement with the government of Canada for a cleanup on the Gunner mine site, which was where Uranium City used to be. And they can only put a meter of waste rock on top of those tailings and those piles of dust that have been flowing into the rivers and the lakes for decades. They can't clean up the lake. There's an area in Lake Athabasca where the local people had asked for a gate to keep the fish out because it's so contaminated. Environment Canada and Government of Saskatchewan and CNSC said, oh no, that would be disruptive to the wildlife. That would be disruptive to the fish. Well, radionuclides have been disruptive to the fish for a very long time, and it's been impacting them. There are signs on some beaches of Lake Athabasca that tell people under the age of 12 and any pregnant women should not only eat the fish, maybe one fish every 2 weeks. Fish is a staple food in northern Saskatchewan, where the price of meat is way beyond most people's affordability. We have had grave concerns about how the uranium industry has affected our food chain. Northern Saskatchewan people, First Nations people, Métis people, all depend on wild foods. It is our preferred food. That's our comfort food. That's our health food. There have been tests done on moose, caribou, fish, berry plants, etc. That measures the radioactive components and heavy metals that are in our food. Everything is said to be below the safety standard. But I asked one of the people who did that study, who was one of the primary scientists on that study, who has since passed away, unfortunately. And when I spoke to her, she said it was all below the safety level. And I asked her, well, what do you think of the safety level? And she said, if I answer that question, I'll never work again, but you're on the right track. So that makes us not trust our own food. Many of us now in our communities don't hunt in our traditional territories. We get permission from other First Nations farther south of us to be able to hunt our traditional food of moose. And we don't eat as much fish. We depend, we're very careful about where our fish comes from, what lakes it's coming from. So these are some of the concerns, because we've seen our cancer rates in northern Saskatchewan soar. When I speak to elders, like the very old First Nations people in our communities, they say there was hardly any such thing as cancer in our communities. After the mines came, cancer came. We've been trying to get epidemiological studies for 15 years, and we haven't been successful. We demanded it at Canadian Nuclear Safety Committee hearings for relicensing of the chemical mines. And all they said was, well, you don't need a study. You just need a wellness study. So Cameco paid for a wellness study to show that they are benefiting the North because they're miners who get more money can buy better food. It's all bogus. Yet our people are seeing younger and younger people getting cancers. I one time was at a hearing with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Committee in La Ronge, and while we were there, 40 women were flown in from Black Lake, where they live close to some of the older mines and the older mine sites. And they were all getting tested for breast cancer because it is so prominent. I tried to meet with people from up there through various means, because it's fly-in communities. They're all fly-in communities. To ask if they're seeing problems with mutations in their children, basically is what I'm going to say. Malformations, mental retardation, those kinds of things, because some of our medical taxi drivers are telling us that when they take somebody in for physio, most of the patients in the room are children from the far north. There used to be a map on Ronald McDonald's house in the city of Saskatoon. And it used to have pinpoints, tacks on the wall, on the map, where people were from, that you had to use Ronald McDonald House. 2/3 were from northern Saskatchewan, from the mining areas. Once we discovered this, the map suddenly disappeared. So trying to get information about the health. Well, you go into a clinic here and there is not one single piece of information about radioactive impacts on health. Nothing. They're afraid to put it in. It's Chemical owns us. Brad Wall, when he was Premier of Saskatchewan, actually told his caucus that the Northern Saskatchewan doesn't need programs from the government of Saskatchewan. It only needs Chemical. So Chemical has pretty much bought and paid for everything. They run surveys that make themselves sound good. They're very biased. You can't give them a real answer. Yet most people in Northern Saskatchewan don't take part in that. But one thing we know is, you know, I run a whistleblowers hotline on my landline, on my phone. And I get information from people who've worked in the mines. And they bypass in the Key Lake mill, they bypass the filter alarms, because when the filters fill up, it sets off an alarm. They're told to bypass it so they don't have to slow down production. But when CNSC comes, they're already pre-announced, everything's cleaned up. But when those things are bypassed, it's emitting out to the environment, out to our environment. The molybdenum plant at that mine had a leak through the floor when they were on shutdown. They put water on the floor because it was so radioactive that when workers went in to check, they would get sick, or they'd have to gear up in really heavy duty hazmat suits. And the water disappeared. It went right through the floor, into the ground, and into the groundwater. And it took 6 months for it to be reported to us on whose land it is. And 4 years later, we still don't have a final word on how they're going to clean it up. They just tried to downplay it. But then when Chemical representatives feet were put to the fire by people who had worked there that said, you guys knew that floor was bad. They said they took the cheap route and just fixed the surface of the floor, knowing full well the entire floor was contaminated with uranium. And the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission admits they don't regulate the facility, the building materials. That's unacceptable. Anyway, it looks like my time is up.
Thank you. We've scheduled quite a long question period after the speaker speaks, so we'll be able to direct more questions and comments to Candace and to Angela. And after that, now we call upon Dale Dewar. Dale Dewar is the former executive director of international physicians for the prevention of nuclear war in Canada. She's also an associate professor of rural family medicine at the University of Saskatchewan, and has been a former clerk of the Canadian Yearly Meeting. She's also authored a book, From Hiroshima, Fukushima to You, a primer on radiation and health, which is published by Between the Lines Press. And as we're recording this event, that should give you enough information to Google it and buy it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chris. I also want to thank the other panelists for participating in this. I would not want to take on the whole hour myself. But I'm going to speak quickly because I don't want to take up all the time. One of the things that wherever we are, when the nuclear industry comes to present, they wind up reminding us that ionizing radiation is natural, normal, it goes through our bodies, it's coming from the sun, it's coming from the potassium in the food we eat, and so therefore, what's the big deal? Why would I tell you it's a big deal? Background ionizing radiation is cancer causing. It's cancer causing right down. There is no 0 point. The Swiss did a study comparing how children under the age of 18 did using background radiation. So what they did is they just took a whole bunch populations of kids, entered the data in there and measured the background radiation and said, what do these kids have? And it didn't matter what we're looking at. Tumors of the brain, lymphomas, leukemias, autoimmune diseases. They found that absolutely every incidence of ill health was increased with just 1 millisievert increase of background radiation. Very small. So background radiation matters. There is no, when we talk about natural radiation, there is no controversy over sunbeams. Everyone recognizes that cosmic rays cause skin cancer, or at least almost everybody does. And so we've got skin cancer, but it also tends to produce cancer. So, and we think it's the ionizing radiation, the cosmic rays. Cosmic rays are made up of broken bits of atoms, the alpha particles, beta particles, gamma rays, and probably a host of other things, photons and neutrinos and things that probably have no effect upon us. A third natural radiation is the radon, the Canadian Public.
I'm just moving, sorry, the microphone a little closer to you, Dane.
Sorry, Gordon has been nagging me to speak louder all the time, so this is not the first time. I sound very loud to myself. That's not her helping you. The Canadian Public Health has warned about radon for the last 10 or 15 years. It's discovered that radon in homes is responsible for about 20% of cancers in non-smoking individuals and increases the incidence of cancers in others in smokers by 17%. So, and radon is entirely natural. Radon is I was going to tell you a little bit about natural. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it does it, how it causes cancer, and then I'm going to talk about some of the ways in which we've been able to measure the effect of ionizing radiation on health. If I say ionizing radiation, we could just call it radiation. But the reason it's called ionizing radiation is that's what it does. When it goes through you or into you, it lodges somewhere and it causes ions. Now, we're made up of complex chemical bonds that hold our skin together, create enzymes that help our cells work, create cellular walls, create genetic material. And all of these chemical bonds can be interrupted or severed with ionizing radiation. All of them. Now, the cell may be able to heal itself. If it's not insulted too much, the cell may be, or it may die. But there's a third thing it can do. It can replicate and not be accurate. It may be replicated with errors. It could be a tumor under the skin that is not cancerous, but it's still a tumor. It could be a cancerous tumor where it's affected the genome. And that's from a natural contact with radiation. Now, I've introduced a couple of terms. Radon, when we breathe it in, or even in the room, decays. Decay is when a radioactive substance gives off a particle of itself, a beta or an alpha particle, and becomes another element. So in the case of radon, it gives off an alpha particle and becomes polonium-219. And that is, if we've got radium-222, that gives off the alpha particle and becomes the polonium-218. If it does that in your lungs, that alpha particle can go and irradiate the cells around it. if it does it, and even if it does it in your bedroom, it then becomes polonium. The polonium-218 is also radioactive, and it's a solid, and it can land on things. It can come down out of the air, because we wind up having the radon constantly. More of it made, we replenished. We wind up having more and more of polonium-218 around. So we have increased incidences of cancer and contact with it. Anyway, but when that decay happens, it sounds like decay, but what actually happens with the particle, the alpha particle or the beta particle has energy, and it is released with energy, and it strikes the human cells with energy. And that's why it breaks the chemical bond. And the thing I want to put together before I leave this topic of how they do it is that we shouldn't, X-rays are also ionizing radiation. Those rays can be turned off or on with a switch, and they can be also accurately measured in terms of how much energy is going into your jaw or your chest or whatever is being X-rayed. So it offers us a real opportunity to see how medical X-rays, medical contact with ionizing radiation can affect our health. I want, as far back as 1903, we have known that gamma rays and X-rays were virtually the same when it came to affecting human health. I won't tell you the story about why. So medical exposure to ionizing radiation. We have 3 particularly good studies recently. One was the use of technetium-99m after a heart attack. Many people will be offered this for after their heart attack to define what the heart looks like in terms of effusion, like the blood going into the heart. Is it working well? How much of the scar tissue? What do the blood vessels look like? For every 10 millisieverts of technetium M99M that the person is received, they have a 3% increase in cancers, all cancers. Now, I would like to know that if I'm being offered technetium and a scan, and every one of my patients that have asked about it have not been told that there is an increase. And because you can make a choice then, okay, I'll have a technetium scan this time, but I think I'll skip it for a few years if they come in. Like, we need to have this kind of knowledge on how to make a decision on whether or not that we get those kind of treatments. And nobody can deny that radiation has been life-saving therapy for many kinds of cancer, whether it is radiation in small beads that is put into the tumor and then destroys it, or if it's radiation from an external beam that kills, that is directed specifically towards the tumor. It's been very useful. However, the incidences of secondary cancers after radiation therapy is anywhere from 3% to 18%, depending on the type of therapy, the amount of therapy, and the kind of cancer that is being approached. But those 2 studies, I think, indicate that ionizing radiation is not good for human health, and they do cause cancer, even when we're not looking for it. And then just this week, the Canadian Medical Association Journal published a very complex study. I don't know enough about statistics to pull it all apart, but the conclusion was that the younger the child and the more CT scans they received of any part of their body, the more likely they are to develop cancers, including solid cancers, that otherwise are not considered children's cancers. And in conclusion, we all have in this room radioactive particles from atomic bomb testing in the 1950s and 60s, strontium-90 and cesium-137. We can use those dates to define when you find human remains, whether or not they were killed before 1950 or after 1950, and they'll be able to use that for another 600 years. They'll be able to tell when you were killed or not. I think that we are really all part of a huge experiment. It's misguided, it's unprincipled, and it's secretive. An industry that has been largely developed, I don't want arguments on this, largely developed though, for the production of nuclear bombs. And have attempted to sell us all on an energy that is literally not good for us. And I'm going to end there. Thank
you, Dan. It's Gordon Edwards' time to speak. Gordon Edwards is a Canadian scientist and nuclear consultant. In 1972, he obtained a PhD in mathematics from Queen's University, and in 1975, he co-founded the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility and has been its president since 1978. Gordon has worked widely as a consultant on nuclear issues and has been qualified as a nuclear expert by courts in Canada and elsewhere. He has written articles and reports on radiation standards, radioactive waste, uranium mining, nuclear proliferation, the economics of nuclear power, and non-nuclear energy strategies. He has worked as a consultant for governing bodies such as the Auditor General of Canada, the Select Committee on Ontario Hydro Affairs, and the Ontario Royal Commission on Electric Power Planning. We welcome Gordon to speak.
Thank you very much, and Society of Friends is such a friendly term. I really think that that's what we need. We need friendship around the planet, friendship between peoples, friendships between races, friendships between genders. And I think that we need to cultivate energy systems and living systems that really promote friendship. And I do believe that I myself am amazed that in today's world, renewable energy has gone so far that every single year it has gone down in cost, every single year, except the last year it went up a little bit. And it's the first time in the whole history of deployment of renewable energy that it's gone up at all. And that's because of the supply chain issues, but it still is 4 times cheaper than nuclear power and about 4 times faster to deploy or more. In other words, you can buy more solar electricity than you can nuclear, 4 times as much with the same money. And you can get it deployed in much shorter time, 1 year, maybe 2 years. Whereas with nuclear, you have to put a lot more money into it and you have to wait a long time. All the time you're waiting for that nuclear reactor to come online. Let me give you a couple of concrete examples. Since 1978, there have only been 4 nuclear reactors ordered in North America. Because although reactors were built and came online after 1978, they were ordered 1978 or earlier. 30 years went by in North America before any more reactors were ordered at all. And there were 4 reactors ordered in the southern United States. 2 of them in Georgia and 2 of them in South Carolina. They were all 4 of them, 1,000 megawatt reactors. The 2 in South Carolina were canceled because they were so slow in being built and the cost was escalating so much. They were canceled after spending $9 billion. And so that debt, that $9 billion was just abandoned. They said, we have to bite the bullet. We can't afford to finish building this reactor. Finishing it is going to be even worse. In South Carolina, they're still building and they have not started producing electricity, but the price has escalated from $12 billion to $28 billion at latest count. And the time it took was 13 years to finish these reactors, which was supposed to be finished in 5 years. This is the thing we have seen with nuclear around the world, is that it's very slow and even slower when it's actually under construction. It's delayed, and very expensive, and those expenses keep escalating. With solar and wind, it's the opposite. They're fast, they're nimble, they're easily deployed, and they're getting cheaper all the time, whereas nuclear is getting more expensive all the time. For this reason, the International Energy Association worldwide has predicted that in the next 5 years, worldwide, 90% of the electricity, the new electricity installations in the world, will be renewable. And because that's where the smart money is going. So here in Canada, unfortunately, we have been sidetracked into investing in nuclear as if that is the way to fight climate change. Now, climate change has been kicked down the road by governments for so long. We should have been addressing this decades ago. We should have been working on this decades ago. And the number one thing that we should have been doing is building energy efficient cities, energy efficient transportation sectors, energy efficient industries. And the savings that can be achieved by simply not wasting energy are phenomenal. In fact, I don't know how many of you are old enough like me to remember the 1973 oil crisis, when people were being shot dead waiting for gasoline in lineups in California, if you remember. And at that time, prior to the crisis, 1973 crisis, electricity demand had been doubling every 10 years, 7% growth rate. And all of the nuclear guys and the other people who were building large electrical infrastructure assumed that that growth was going to even accelerate. So that if it was doubling every 10 years, it's going to be doubling even faster. And all over North America, there was overbuilding of electricity facilities. What actually happened was that the electricity demand leveled off at about 2%. Way below the 7%. And in some cases, it even went negative. And the reason for this was because people were investing in energy efficiency. And in fact, what they were really trying to do, companies and individuals around the North America were trying to save on oil and fossil fuels, but it's almost impossible to save on oil and fossil fuels without also saving on electricity. So they were saving on electricity without even setting out to do that. And that's why the demand dropped so dramatically. So there was a huge amount of electrical demand, energy demand, that was actually fulfilled by conservation and energy efficiency. And that's what we should be promoting. That's what you should be doing. I have a friend who's a very good analyst. His name is Ralph Torrey. And he pointed out, just as an example, and I'm not saying that this is a policy we could actually pursue tomorrow, but he pointed out that if in Quebec happens to use a lot of electrical heating, that's the primary source of heating, if a lot of it is electrical resistance heating. Now imagine if Quebec wanted to not only run its heating system on electricity, but also its whole transportation sector on electricity. Well, you can imagine how much more electricity you would need, right? To run the electricity, to run the transportation sector. Ralph Torrey shown me the calculations, and I can share them with you if you contact me, that if you simply switch the space heating in Quebec right now to heat pumps, use heat pumps instead of resistance heating, you would save enough electricity to run the entire transportation sector without building a single new electricity generating plant. We overlook the fact that the first law of physics in thermodynamics, which is the science of energy, in thermodynamics, the first law is that energy is neither created nor destroyed. It is simply converted from one form to the other. When we talk about wasting energy or consuming energy, what we're doing is we're throwing that energy. Energy is the ability to do work. And if we waste energy, that energy goes out into the environment and does work that we don't want done. It warms the planet. It, in some cases, causes acid rain. It does a lot of destructive things to the environment. If we use that energy wisely, we should be able to displace a great deal of energy use. Now, I want to talk about another whole aspect of nuclear, which goes beyond the energy supply business. And that is, as touched upon by Gail Dewar, nuclear is really the fundamental force behind nuclear weapons. And climate change is not the only existential crisis of the human race. We also have the crisis of annihilating ourselves through nuclear warfare, which could be done in a matter of hours. We have enough nuclear weapons already, even on high alert, that could be launched within 2 minutes, that are enough to wipe out every city in the Northern Hemisphere and enough to destroy human civilization and very rapidly. Calculations by people who are climate scientists have also shown that if you even had a limited nuclear war, God forbid, say between India and Pakistan, God forbid, then let's say they had a couple of dozen nuclear weapons on either side that they actually used belligerently against cities, that the soot and carbon from those burning cities would be enough to cause rapid decline in agricultural production throughout the Northern Hemisphere and cause real starvation, real shortage of food supplies, a kind of a mini nuclear winter. That's with a small nuclear war. If you had a major nuclear war, such as between the superpowers, that would be a real nuclear winter, which would jeopardize many forms of life on Earth in a rapid time. So climate change can be brought about by nuclear warfare. Now, when they discovered, when Canada became involved in the nuclear program, the nuclear weapons program, it was because we had the uranium. The uranium actually it was in about 100 miles south of the Arctic Circle, in the land of the Dene Satu Nation around Great Bear Lake. And because we had the uranium, we became partners with the Americans and the British in developing the world's first atomic bombs. That was the Manhattan Project. Many people don't know that from 1941 until 1965, all of the Canadian uranium that was sold for bombs. It all went to with very small amounts for research, but almost all of it went for bombs. We also built our first reactor at Chalk River, Ontario, on the Ottawa River, and that was built by means of a military decision that was taken in Washington, D.C. in 1944. And the purpose of that reactor, and the purpose of all the reactors that were built originally, was to produce plutonium for bombs. That was the purpose. Now, uranium can be used directly in bombs only if it's undergoing a process called enrichment. That's something we don't do in Canada. Enrichment is a very sensitive technology because it allows you to concentrate the explosive kind of uranium, which is uranium-235, to a truly explosive amount. Natural uranium, which we use in our reactors here, can be used for bombs. And even the low enriched uranium that's used by the Americans in their reactors can't be used for bombs. It has to be much more highly enriched for that. But plutonium is an artificial material created inside every nuclear reactor. And it does not have to be enriched. It can be used for bombs directly. And for that reason, among other reasons, it has become the nuclear weapons material of choice. Now, here in Canada, we have the nuclear industry is hungry for business. They have been suffering a slide, as was pointed out before, going from 17% of electricity, world electricity, down to 10% and less. And please remember that when we say 10% of electrical demand, electricity is only one slice of the energy pie. So when you look at that 10% of electricity production, it's really only about 2% of energy use. So it's actually a pretty small slice of the energy pie overall. And the idea that you can build enough nuclear reactors to replace oil and fossil fuels by simply this long, tedious, very expensive process of building these large reactors and even the small reactors is not the way to fight climate change. The way to fight any emergency is to do what's fastest and quickest and cheapest first, and to do things which are proven, things which you know are going to work. The trouble with these small reactors is we don't even know they're going to work. None of them have been built yet. And so they're questionable. We have in Canada built small reactors that didn't work at all. In Chalk River, they built 2 reactors called Maple 1 and Maple 2. They were only 10 megawatt reactors, very small, didn't produce any electricity. They didn't work. they dismantled, they slated them for decommissioning without ever getting any useful value of it. In Quebec, we had a reactor called a Gentil 1, which was a small reactor by definition. And it only functioned for a total of 180 days, and that was it, and never produced a single useful kilowatt of offsite electricity. We had another small reactor called the Slowpoke district heating reactor. They tried to give one free to the University of Sherbrooke, and the University of Sherbrooke turned it down. Then they tried to give one free to the University of Saskatchewan. And no, you took, no. Turned down too. Both busters together. And in fact, that never ever got licensed for operation of reactor. So there's no guarantee these reactors are going to work. But one thing is sure, if they start operating, they too are going to be producing plutonium. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years. So as my friend Robert Del Tredici, a famous photographer, has said, the real product of a nuclear reactor is really not electricity. It's nuclear waste for 10 million years and plutonium for 240,000 years. And on the way towards those products, you get a little blip of electricity for a few decades, 30, 40 years maximum perhaps. And you get that electricity and then you have the problems forever. So, and by the way, that plutonium that is produced with a 24,000 year half-life, it means that any regime anywhere in the world can go and dig up that waste where the reactor produced long after the reactors have all been shut down and forgotten. And they can take that plutonium and use it to build arsenals of nuclear weapons. So this is really not a life-affirming technology. Now, on top of the plutonium that is produced, there are hundreds of other radioactive, not actually occurring. Dr. Dewar talked about naturally occurring radionuclides, which are damaging to human health, such as radon and polonium, very deadly things, by the way. Well, for example, polonium-210, even the American Health Physics Society has said that up to 90% of the 240,000+ deaths due to cigarette smoking every year in the United States and North America are due actually to polonium-210, this radioactive material that gets into tobacco through carelessness, through the careless use of radioactive fertilizer. The radioactive fertilizer turns out to generate radon gas. The radon gas builds up under the canopy of tobacco leaves and deposits polonium onto the sticky hairs of the tobacco leaves, so that when the tobacco is harvested and sold in stores, it contains polonium-210 from the radon gas, from the radioactive fertilizer. When the smoker lights the cigarette and smokes it, it vaporizes it, goes into the lungs, and causes not only lung cancer, but also heart disease and so on. That's naturally occurring material, but we brought it to the surface. So it was much safer when it was deep underground. By mining this material and bringing it to the surface, we're making it much more available to the environment, much more available not only to humans, but to animals, birds, and so on. And even we've had millions, in fact, of buildings that have been built with radioactive materials caused by the bringing this stuff to the surface. Even in Oka in Quebec, there have been a lot of homes built with radioactive material. Port Hope is now undergoing a $1.2 billion cleanup because there are hundreds and hundreds of homes that are built with radioactive material from the nuclear industry, from the uranium industry. In addition to those naturally occurring materials, there's a host of not natural, artificial nuclear materials, which are only about as old as I am. As a matter of fact, the high-level radioactive waste in a nuclear reactor, things like cesium-137, strontium-90, iodine-131, technetium-99, these are actual products of the fission process. They're created inside a nuclear reactor, and they didn't exist. They were never found on Earth before 1939. It's us who's created them, and they're not any older than I am. So the question is, why are we in a rush to just abandon these wastes, which are going to be deadly for millions of years, literally? Why are we such in a hurry to abandon them? The reason why is because the industry is under threat. They're declining, and if they cannot convince people that they can solve the waste problem, they will not be allowed to continue. But we are allowing them in Canada to continue without solving that problem. So we're in a big problem there. Now, I think I've overtaken my time, so I'm just going to wrap up with one thought. And that is that we have to start living more lightly on the earth. We have to be friendly to the earth, friendly to our fellow creatures. We have to stop mass producing poisons. We should stop technologies which routinely mass produce some of the most poisonous materials ever found on Earth. We created them. So I do believe that the thing to go with renewables is that they do not create these toxic materials. They do use materials which are toxic. There are materials naturally occurring, rare earth elements and so on, which are very toxic and dangerous, which are necessary for some of these renewable energy. But those materials can be recycled, and they might be able to be replaced with other materials as time goes on. It's not for certain that these are the only materials that can be used for the purposes for which they're being used. So don't get me wrong, there are toxic materials involved in renewable energy too, but those materials can be recycled. The materials from nuclear power cannot be recycled. Even the steel and the concrete that's used in the nuclear reactor, none of it can be reused. It all has to be buried as radioactive waste. As has sometimes been said, nuclear power is the ultimate extension of the throwaway society, whereas renewable energy is the ultimate extension of the recycling ideal. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. We're going to start by taking questions from the meeting room, and then we'll move to taking questions from the Zoom room. Just because we can't go back and forth, we have some problem with that efficiency here. So I welcome questions, and would you please state who you would like to answer the question for, if it's a global question. Please, gentlemen, with the green shirt.
My name is Richard Everlight.
May have to speak
Speak
up.
loudly.
So my name is Richard Everlight, and I'm a concerned citizen. I assume that you've written letters to your politicians that represent your area. And I'm interested to find out what the reply was.
My representative is Andrew Shear. You can guess what your reply is.
I don't know the character.
Okay, he was temporarily the leader of the Conservative Party, and he is definitely, I think he's a climate denier for starters. And he really just threw me off.
We have this week, thanks to some of the people here in the room, Susan O'Donnell over there has played a key role in helping us to organize ourselves to have a week of lobbying. And we had a press conference on Tuesday night, which got good coverage, but we've been meeting members of parliament from all parties. In the press conference itself, we had 4 different members of parliament, 4 different parties, to highlight the fact that this is a nonpartisan issue, and they are concerned about the unanswered questions and the unanswered implications of pursuing this technology. So we're trying to do our best as citizens. It's not easy, because we have a multi-billion-dollar industry which has very deep pockets, and as the Liberal, the NDP member who was attending our press conference said, they don't have to knock on the door to talk to the government. They just walk right in. There's no lock for them because they own the house, and that's the problem. The problem is there's so much money being given in donations to political parties, and there's so much influence in political parties and prestige attached to it, that is something that the politicians like. Renewable energy doesn't have the same kind of powerful sex appeal of nuclear. I believe that the renewables, precisely because it doesn't have that powerful punch, is exactly the kind of thing we need for a sustainable planet. We need politicians who think differently. We need politicians to say, forget the razzmatazz, forget the large donations, work on what is sustainable. That's what we do not have yet. We don't have a generation of
I
politics.
get the impression that your representative is just burying his head in the sand, not
Right.
reading your letter that you gave.
I'm quite sure. I think under your letter, under your question though, is the kind of the assumption that we all work together. We come from a host of different organizations, more than 120 organizations. And we come together in meetings, online, on this issue. So it's not that we even are the same people in same organizations that we represent. And so our organizations may have had different approaches to the government as well.
The only assumption I made that you all have representatives that represent your area.
Yes, that's, okay, yeah, that's true, sorry.
Angela would like to answer.
I think that's a really good question. We all really need to reach out to our representatives, whether they're provincial, municipal, or federal, in this case, especially provincial and federal, because they really don't hear from us. We've been meeting with MPs all week, and I write my politicians around the province, around the country, every day we're sending letters, and we encourage our supporters to send letters. Some responses are like, more often than not, we might not get a response. Occasionally, we'll get automatic responses, and sometimes we'll get very meaningful responses that we don't accept and we write back. But it's opening the door, because what we heard this week from MPs is they're hearing from the nuclear lobby. They're hearing from the oil and gas lobby. We see that all the time in the news. They're not hearing from citizens who are concerned about nuclear power. We need you all to step up, reach out and make those lobby efforts, especially to your local politicians, but also to, the Minister of Environment, the Minister of Natural Resources. Get out your pens and get those letters. And we organize by inviting people to send automatic letters. So if you're on my mailing list, you'll get regular weekly invitations. Click here to send a letter to the Minister of Natural Resources, etc. And those are very valuable. If they get 1,000 letters on one certain issue, they're gonna take note of that. But even personal letters, like those postcards, those are very important to, it's never a waste of time to reach out to a politician. Please, everybody, take that upon yourselves. If you are moved at all by tonight's discussion, please send in your own personal letters.
Angela Bischoff has a wonderful nuclear news bulletin that anybody can subscribe to. And it keeps you informed and gives you the kind of prompts that Angela was just talking about. All you have to do is click a button to send a letter, who to know to send a letter to and what to do. So I think we have to stop asking, why doesn't somebody do something, and say, why don't I do something? This is what we all have to say to ourselves.
Is that the back? Oh, okay.
She was here.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I have two questions. I think the first one, we can that aside quickly. So in terms of you saying that the small nuclear reactors are just ideas, PowerPoints, it's across my mind that we have these nuclear submarines cruising around and they must have small nukes, right? So why can't they just land those and voila, you have a small nuclear modular reactor? So that was my first question. My second question is to you, Gordon. So you got your PhD when I was this big, right? And all this horrible stuff about the state of our world. And even as you were talking, I was feeling myself getting more anxious. And my daughter tells me I suffer from eco-anxiety. And I guess I can't deny it. So most of the time I spend frantically running around,
Right.
active and organizing people and things like that. But I'm wondering how do you, because you've been going for a long time in terms of fighting the good fight, and how do you do that in terms of emotionally and knowing what you know?
Okay, well, those are two
Go ahead.
big questions.
Take it.
Shall I take
Go
them
ahead.
both?
Yeah.
Okay, with regard to the small nuclear nuclear submarine, it's true, they have small reactors which they use as propulsion units in the nuclear submarine. They're very expensive, and they use weapons grade uranium as fuel. In other words, because they want to be small, they want to have very highly concentrated fuel. And so the material they use is exactly the same material that was in the Hiroshima bomb. Now, the trouble is that if you use that for nuclear, for civilian use, then anybody could take that material and use it to make atomic bombs. And that would be available to criminals, it would be available to governments of all kinds and so on. That's unthinkable. Nobody would be allowed to use that material. The other thing is that with military, nobody cares about how much it costs somehow. It's been trillions of dollars on military personnel, and it's never a question of, well, wait a minute now, is that economical? Does it pay for itself? Well, no, it doesn't pay for itself. They're paying whatever they have to make, you know? If you wanted to take some of those things that are used in the military and put them into civilian use, they simply wouldn't pass the economic test. It wouldn't be affordable, and it'd also be far too dangerous. And those, what they're missing is the modular aspect. What does small modular even mean? There's no actual firm definition. But here's the problem. When you have a big reactor, the reason the reactor is big is because otherwise you'd have to build a lot of small ones. A lot of small ones cost more money than the big ones. And so actually the electricity from small reactors is going to be more expensive, not less expensive than from the big reactors. And that's going to happen with the small modular reactors as well. And we're going to find that out through our displeasure, I believe, because these things are going to cost a lot of money. Now, the thing is that they are hoping, the industry is hoping, that if they could mass produce these things, like we mass produce refrigerators, that way they could bring the price down. And so the modular part is being able to modularize it, to make it into modules that can be manufactured and sold like a mass-produced product. That I think is very, very unlikely, and the reason why is because of the expense and because there are virtually no customers. The only customers they actually have right now are governments. They're getting a lot of government money and government corporations. Ontario Power Generation is really a government-owned corporation. New Brunswick Power Corporation is a government-owned operation. When it comes to private customers, there just aren't anything. And so, and moreover, they have so many different competing models of these small modular reactors. We in Canada already have 5 different models that are being entertained. They're all competing with each other. So what's the chance that one of them is going to have the order book that's going to allow them to afford to mass produce them? This is not probably going to work. Now, I kind of missed the thread of your last question. Perhaps that was the last. Oh yeah, about heat stream. I'll tell you, I worried about this for about 1 year when I first became active in this. You know, I'm basically an educator. I feel that I can explain things in terms that people can understand because of my scientific training and because of my English literature background as well. I have a master's in English literature, and the combination of language and science allows me to bridge that gap between the two solitudes, the scientist and the non-scientist. And I think that can be used, that can be a useful service that I can give back to society, because I've benefited so much. My education was largely paid for by not by me, but by society, right? And I figure that I owe something back to society. So I feel more fulfillment in being able to do something that I think is maybe helpful to people to understand the issues. But I decided long ago that it's not up to me to decide whether what I do is effective or not, or whether it works or not. It's up to me to do what I think is right and what I think should be done. So I just carry on with that, and I don't suffer from eco-anxiety, actually. Not that I don't think that there's an awful lot wrong, and there's an awful lot that needs to be done, but I figure being anxious about it doesn't help. And frankly, I think it's not a helpful emotion. I think it's better. And I found that when I started becoming active, I felt better. I really felt better in myself, and I still do. And I'd like to continue in that front. I certainly hope that we collectively, as friends, solve these problems. It's not up to me to solve them, but I'm willing to pitch in and play a role. And I think we all should do that. We can all do something. You know, we're much more powerful than we think we are. Just in your own circle of friends, if every human being was activated in such a way as to activate 2 other human beings, and those 2 were activated so as to influence 4 other human beings, you'd have a chain reaction of consciousness that would actually result in a revolutionary breakthrough in society. But if people feeling helpless and feeling that they're powerless, that they don't do that simple job of just influencing other people and getting a chain reaction going.
Love it. Chain reaction, nuclear.
Before we questions from the room. I'm going to ask Bob if he can unmute Candace Paul, because she's been sending me a flurry of messages here. And it's probably best to have Candace weigh in on some of these questions as well.
Okay, well, for starters, the Sask Party government, of which our MLA is one, and it's a real big majority government, are pushing the Sask First Act, and that's to give them access to more and more of the resources, uranium being one of the big ones. They are also promoting the use of SMRs in Saskatchewan and part of the NRCan push to employ SMRs to power mining across northern Canada, including in tar sands bitumen production. In terms of what we feel when dealing with this, we feel it's our duty for the sake of future generations of all living beings to stand up to this, to do what we can to stop it. I hear a lot that they're going to do it to us anyway. Well, when Nuclear Waste Management Organization was pushing for a deep geological repository in northern Saskatchewan, we stopped them. And it was from people all across Saskatchewan, getting people together to say, no, you're not doing it. It doesn't matter how much money you throw around, you're not doing it here. And that was also including uranium miners. They said, don't let them bring it here. So that's where it's at.
I'll take two more questions from the room and then we'll go on to the Zoom. Well, not you. So it's you.
Hey, I don't know much about this, but I do know what I'm hearing is, when we talk about climate change and, Madame Brewer, you were talking about, you had Andrew Scheer, who was a climate change denier. So climate change is a very divisive topic. So when we start talking about climate change, there's going to be the deniers and there's going to be the people that say that there's going to be climate change. My background is in communications and in marketing, and it seems to me you've got 120 organizations that you can be working with. When I heard your stats about, plutonium staying around for 240,000 years and the other one stayed around for,
10 million,
which one was that?
the high level waste.
The high level waste. It seems to me that people don't recognize the waste that we are generating. And I
Right.
think if we can put a message around waste, which is actually, you can actually prove it, there can't be any denial about it. So somehow put a message about waste, which can't be controversial. So, and then get everybody around that. So it's, in marketing, speak with one voice, have a slogan that everybody can go after. Then when you start talking about waste that you're dealing with, you can then attack all at the same time, the fossil fuel industry, the nuclear industry, and all these other industries. So that's my suggestion, is that really start putting together a really good marketing campaign. One voice, one slogan, and deal with waste which can be proven and is not divisible. And
Will you work with us?
Yeah, come join us.
sure, great.
Young Christina.
Hi, so I might be a little bit younger than a couple of the people in this
Sure.
room.
Right?
So as a member of the generation who will likely bear the brunt of the climate crisis that we are currently facing, it's very easy to be scared, but I hold a lot of optimism in my heart that we will be able to fight climate change. But that being said, I am personally of the opinion that nuclear will need to be one of the avenues that we fight climate change through. I'm curious as to your points about energy efficiency were very interesting. I haven't heard those in many other places, as well as new announcements in battery storage technology. I believe there was one just recently that said they were able to have a battery with 500 kilowatt hours per kilogram, which is pretty amazing. So I guess my question to everyone, my question to everyone here is, why can't we pursue nuclear and renewables? we in Canada have a wealth of natural resources, such as Saskatchewan has the highest quality uranium in the world and one of the largest deposits. And I know that there are so many issues with mining and consultations and Indigenous collaboration. I do have quite a few hangups about nuclear, but why can't we pursue, why does nuclear have to be a distraction? And why can't it be a supplemental alongside renewables? Shift renewables as we move off of coal and then implement nuclear as a base load down the line. What is stopping us?
I'll take that, it's a good question,
Sure,
you can
go ahead.
respond as well. So, we can meet all our electricity needs at a fraction of the cost of nuclear with renewable power. The world is going renewable, I said 16 countries are already 100%, so why would we? If we can meet our electricity needs with wind, water, solar, storage from hydro reservoirs, batteries, offshore wind power, EV batteries feeding back into the grid, conservation to reduce demand. All these options are at our disposal, and the world is moving in those directions. We do not need nuclear, which is going to leave a toxic legacy for hundreds of thousands of generations. Why would we do that when we haven't solved the problems of waste? We haven't solved the concerns around catastrophic accidents. Like, we just don't need it. And they're so many times more expensive. And they're decades away. Like, we can roll out renewables, large renewable farms, wind and solar in 1 year. That's how we meet the climate crisis head on, instead of wasting more money and time on some phantom option that may never even come to fruition, and that will leave a toxic legacy for untold future generations. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole.
But if I might add to what Angela has just said, which is very good. We found that nuclear and renewables are basically not compatible with each other. The nuclear industry, as a matter of fact, in Ontario, when they were shutting down Niagara Falls, which is the cheapest renewable electricity imaginable, they were shutting off Niagara Falls power in order to sell nuclear power. And the reason why was because the nuclear plants are more expensive to shut them down during times of slack demand than it is to start them up again and run the cheapest hydropower that we have. There was a study done, I forget the author, maybe somebody could remind me, but there was a study done of several countries, and those countries that invested primarily in renewables and not in nuclear were far more effective at reducing greenhouse gas emissions than those countries that invested in renewable, in nuclear rather. And so we have case studies which illustrate that point. Now, I noticed it in your comment, which was thoughtful, and you're not the only one, of course, who thinks this way, because this is a common message put out. There's no doubt that we have enough renewable energy to meet all of our demands. The big problem is storage. But as a matter of fact, storage is something that is going to have to be solved whether you go nuclear or renewable, because there's no way you can electrify a transportation sector without storage. Now, the interesting thing is that every increase in storage technology, every improvement in storage technology benefits renewables far more than it benefits nuclear. So already renewables are much cheaper than nuclear. Any investment, any improvements in storage is just going to widen the gap between nuclear and renewables. So my feeling is playing the devil's advocate, because I don't believe we will need nuclear at all, but playing the devil's advocate. Even if you needed nuclear, sometimes down the line, which you thoughtfully said, you know, that down the line we could use nuclear. Well, why not go full throttle on the renewables, see how far we can go, see how much we can improve our technology. We may find that we've solved the problem. We may find that we don't need nuclear at all. If we don't need it, hey, great, we're home free. So I think that my point is that strategically, the common sense thing is, if you have an emergency, you do the cheapest, fastest things first, and that's renewables, not nuclear.
Thank you for that question. I just want to make a It's hard for me not to sit on my tongue. Many of you of our generation were raised during the Cold War, so we're Cold War kids. And the threat of nuclear annihilation was there all the time, especially for friends who grew up in the States who actually had bunkers and built in their houses. But at the same time, we were intrigued by peaceful uses of the science that we were finding with nucleotides and things like that. So there is a question about the peaceful atom, and I don't know whether that was a bit of propaganda that was brought up in the 60s to bring us forward, but it's still fascinating science.
Yeah, it is.
And I can understand why people still have a fascination for this, and I really value your question. Thank you. And, oh, sorry, yes, I'll take one more from the floor and then we'll get Candace.
I just wanted to add on to what I think the board has said. The bottom line is that if we do go down the nuclear route at great expense and continue to expand, we'll just be economically left behind because our energy will cost 4 or 10 times what it will for people who've gone down the renewable route. And it'd just be a complete economic disaster.
Thank you. Candace?
Well, I was trying to, I sent a photograph to Robert. If he could post it up, as the person was asking for something that might be catchy. And this is something that worked for us during the nuclear waste management push for a nuclear waste dump.
Thank you. I think I'll go to questions from the Zoom room. So please send your questions in the chat. I got a couple already. Oh, there was but that's okay. Got one back here. Carl's gonna have the last word here. All right. So it is quite a wide and wonderful series of text here. Okay, there's a comment from Ann Coxworth that might be food for thought. And Ann Coxworth has written, it seems to me the main hesitancy about relying on renewables is due to their intermittency. We have to be able to demonstrate that this can be effectively overcome. Do you have comments on?
So it is true, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, as they say. But let's look at Ontario and the eastern the Maritimes as well. So the MIT has done a study that the Northeast United States and Canada, our lowest cost, largest source of storage is Quebec's massive water power reservoirs can act as storage and backup for Ontario's intermittent wind and solar and Eastern Canada's as well. So when we have surplus wind and solar, we can send it across the border to Quebec. They can reserve their water in the reservoirs, and then when we have, when we need more wind and solar or more power, we can get it from Quebec. But the thing is that Quebec peaks in the winter and Ontario peaks in the summer. So in the summer, when our air conditioners are going off full blast and we need more peaking power, that's when we can get surplus power from Quebec. So it's a perfect complement. That's hydro reservoirs and water power with Ontario's intermittent wind and solar. As well, we can lift the moratorium on offshore wind power. A study was done for the Ontario government that looked at all the potential spots in the Great Lakes around Ontario that could provide Ontario with wind power. And there was enough sites in the Great Lakes to power all of Ontario's demand. The point is we have massive surplus. Wind and solar is a free resource. Once you've built the infrastructure, which can be produced en masse through economies of scale. And the world is producing massive amounts. For example, the whole country of Canada uses, our peak demand is 150,000 megawatts of electricity. Just last year alone, the 6 largest solar power companies produced double that amount, 300,000 megawatts of solar panels that are going to be rolled out through the world by 2025. That's how fast and how plentiful just solar is. Wind is the same thing. It's rolling out around the world. They're putting it offshore far, 12 kilometers in the middle of Lake Erie to power Ohio. Like this is the potential. Batteries technology has improved. That's where we need to be putting our emphasis. EV batteries can be putting power back into the grid. We have plenty of options without going down a radioactive rabbit hole, which is expensive and toxic forever. That's not to say there aren't toxics around the mining of minerals for solar and wind or batteries, etc. No electricity source or storage source is, 100% perfect. But we need to pick and choose what are the most benign, lowest cost, fastest ways to get us off of carbon. And clearly renewables can get us there.
I'd like to add to what Angela said, which I agree with, is that we think of renewables as being hydro and solar because they have really proven themselves and they've done amazingly well in the world's marketplaces. But there's other forms of renewable energy, and as we go down the renewable path, we'll be using more and more of those other forms of renewable. Geothermal energy, the heat of the earth itself, what we see in volcanoes, that energy is used to heat cities in Iceland. They have whole cities which are heated with geothermal energy. And because the crust happens to be thinner there, and the geothermal energy is actually bubbling up out of the ground, they have geysers which you put your hand in and you're going to burn your hand. So, that hot water is just from the earth itself. Now, with deep drilling techniques, we can harness geothermal energy in the future. I believe that that's going to be an increasingly important form of renewable energy, but there are other forms of renewable energy. Britain had a series of paddles that ride up and down on the waves, and they had paddles of different sizes. And as the waves come in, it generates electricity just by the motion of these paddles. There are other ways of harnessing energy from the ocean. It's called ocean thermal. You can read about it. They're kind of like caissons, which are put into the ocean and which actually generate electricity just by the convection flow, natural convection flow of the water through these caissons. We have a lot of different renewable energies that we haven't even begun to tap. So solar and wind right now are doing extremely well. And that's why we talk about them so much. But that's not the end of the story. That's just the beginning of the story. The renewable energy potentials for the future are really much, much greater than what we have experienced so far.
Thank you. Laura Myers has raised the specter of a film called, come on, Laura. An Oliver Stone film. Laura Myers has mentioned the Oliver Stone film called Nuclear Now. And she's stated in her text, if people watch that, it will convince them. What can we do to convince the general public that he, Oliver Stone, is wrong?
I haven't seen the film, but I don't hold, and I don't think Oliver Stone is a credible storyteller. But I have not, it's just because of other films he's produced, but I haven't seen that film.
This is not a propaganda war. The nuclear industry likes to think that if they put out enough propaganda, they'll win the climate change victory. But in fact, their propaganda is really intended to simply promote their industry. And I think that they're really taking advantage of the climate change problem because they know that trillions of dollars around the world are being put on the table by governments to fight climate change. And since they have been doing poorly over the last 25 years, they're thinking, why don't we grab as much of that money as we can? And that's really what it's about. And frankly, although I agree very much with the chair tonight, Chris, I believe it is, who said that it's fascinating science. It's absolutely true. It is fascinating science. And these people want to get public money so that they can pursue that fascinating science. Doesn't mean they're going to solve the climate change problem. I don't believe they are. What they are going to do is they're going to gobble up a lot of money pursuing the kind of research that they love to do, but that's not solving our problems.
Well, and they lie in the media. They say it is clean, it's safe, right? It's renewable. They're going to recycle. And you already heard Dr. Edwards talk about how recycling is not recycling. The clean nuclear power has to emit radioactive gases all the time, either by accident or by plan. They do it all the time. Those gases come off with small amounts of other radioactive substances. So that's hardly clean. And I do not think under what I believe was that the safety that anyone could say it's safe when it spews out radioactive waste into the air around us, leaves radioactive waste that we're left to clean forever, and also has the potential to kinds of accidents that we've seen. And we only know of 3 huge accidents, and we can't forget there's been a whole host of other accidents from Chalk River, Santa Ana,
Sellafield reactor,
the Church River, what is it called? The
French River.
Clinch River. There's been dozens of accidents that have left us with as a more radioactive, not safe, not clean.
The thing about nuclear is that it seems to be safe and it seems to be clean because you don't see radiation. The radiation is invisible. You can't taste it, you can't see it, you can't smell it, and it's invisible to our senses. So it looks absolutely perfectly clean. And I think the industry plays on that idea, but it's actually giving off. Hydro-Quebec published a list of 42 different radionuclides that are given off routinely, not by accident, but routinely into the water and into the air, constantly. And they simply don't talk about these because nobody sees them, and but our body experiences them because they do enter our bodies and they become part of our food chain and so on. The safety of nuclear reactors was tackled by when President Clinton, sorry, not President Clinton, Jimmy Carter. President Jimmy Carter had a presidential commission. He himself commissioned a special study as to the causes of the 3 Mile Island accident that occurred. And a mathematician named George Kemeny was the head of that study. And what that study concluded, their main conclusion was that the fundamental cause of the 3 Mile Island accident was the false belief by the workers and the managers that nuclear power is inherently safe. That has got to change so that the operators and managers and society at large recognizes that nuclear power is inherently dangerous, and it can only be made safe by extraordinary efforts on the part of the workers at all times. So that's the real conundrum here, is that you can make it safe for a period of time, but you can never be sure that it's going to be safe, because look at the tsunami, look at what happened at 3 Mile Island, look what happens in case of warfare. If these reactors are bombed from the air in cases of warfare, or if they're sabotaged from within, then you're going to have large regions of the world which are radioactively contaminated and uninhabitable, simply as a result of normal conventional conflicts, for example.
I'd like to acknowledge some of the text messages, and I'll take a couple more questions from the floor, and then we'll say goodbye. In the text message, several text messages have mentioned our overconsumption of energy, and we should dial that down. There was and we all agree that's useful. We have We had a question earlier in the text, we won't be able to answer that, but it's a general one about how we can use civil disobedience to get this apart. But get this information across, but we talked about communication and the simple act of disobedience, I suppose, is writing a stern letter to the editor. Various other places.
I have something to say regarding like this last little bit as well. First of all, the nuclear industry you cannot get insurance on it. Your home, anything happen, any accident happens, and you're affected by the radioactivity from a nuclear power plant accident, there's no insurance whatsoever. The other thing is, I sat on a panel with Canadian Nuclear Laboratories a couple years ago, and the guy from Canadian Nuclear Laboratories said, when we asked him, okay, what are you going to do in one of these remote communities where you want to put one of these SMRs and there's an accident? He says, well, we're not too worried. It'll only affect a few kilometer radius. Well, that few kilometer radius is us.
Right.
So we're pretty much expendable, and you are expendable in larger centers as well. And that's how they view us. Also, one other thing with the nuclear waste management organization rep at a meeting, I asked her, why would you transport that stuff, that highly toxic, dangerous, radioactive stuff across 3 provinces to bring it here? She said, because the people of Toronto don't feel safe. She lived in Toronto. That tells me that we're expendable again.
Well, the beauty of nuclear waste is that it's unsafe in Toronto, but it's gonna be safe when they take it to your community.
And gentlemen, the red, and
The propaganda war, the marketing campaign still is important. I grew up in the United States. Half a mile up Calumet Avenue from where I live was a Nike missile site that was to fire its missiles on Soviet planes coming to Chicago. But it wasn't terribly effective. But our suburb was south of Chicago, so they would have bombed the city by the time they got to us. Where it was effective was this tiny little site that they took school kids through. And I was our 4th grade class went through that Nike missile site, and we learned about how this was protecting our country and all of this sort of thing. And so we got to get our marketing message, our side of the propaganda war, really clear, so we show what is happening. Also, the links between the military and nuclear power are huge. We have some allies among nuclear scientists. The Journal of Atomic Scientists Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is a fantastic publication that we should use more and more often.
Thank you.
thank you. I realized you had was a high.
I just wanted to say, in just the last 2 days, so I just came back from Ukraine, and so I've been working there as a midwife and an activist just in childbirth, and so.
Could you speak a little louder, because the microphone won't pick it up if you don't speak loudly.
Okay, maybe I'm gonna.
You can come in.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you.
I tend to be an activist just because I like to do things, and as a midwife, I have to be very practical all the time. And the reason I went to Ukraine is because I wanted to see if there's anything I could do right away. And it's so spectacular to watch Ukrainians gathering together because they have, and it's very much like Seth Klein's metaphor of using the how we got ourselves so well organized so quickly during the Second World War, and he uses that as an analogy for what we could do if everyone really understood how desperate the climate disaster is. And so when we're sitting in Ukraine and people are coming from Zaporizhzhia and Nikolaev, which are the 2 places where the nuclear reactors are, and they're very aware of how much danger they're in, they just gather together and they're able to get everybody involved, and people will just do things, so, and so yesterday we were down. Kelly and I live near our first time, and we had to stop off there on the way to come here to meet with nuclear people, but the people there are worried about wind on their farms,
Right.
and I'm thinking, why don't those people get together with people here? Because it feels to me like the debate that you have, which unfortunately started just gonna move. But it's so useful to get these pockets of people together to really do something. And it's so sad to me also that they're not more young people. Because they have been up, Saturdays for our future. So I just want to say, I know that our Association of Care Midwives, for instance, has some interest in this, but we are so dogged. We've got our own problems with the medical profession, so we're dealing with all those problems all the time. And somehow we need to put all those problems together and realize we're all very similar. I just wanted to say that. Thank you. And thank you so much for coming.
Okay, if any of you are interested in some of the materials that have been passed out to MDs this week, I'll put them here on the table, and you can get a taste of the kind of communication that we've been using.
Yes, my quick question is, okay, so like apparently Putin and Biden were talking, like, you know, what do you call it? Zoom, Zoom call, like a Zoom call? Okay, and basically, my question is about propaganda and war. So Putin has threatened to use nukes. He's invaded Ukraine as a moron. And he also said to Biden, I heard, he said to Biden, my nuclear weapons are more sophisticated than yours. So don't, I guess it was like, you know, they want to just talk openly and talk. They were like, you want to fight a war with me, Biden? Well, my nuclear weapons are more sophisticated. I want to let you know something. I got to reveal something to you, Biden. My weapons are way more now. We now have way more sophisticated weapons than you do. So just, you know, don't even try. Don't even think of it. This is what I heard. This is propaganda. Okay, do you know?
There's a few holes in there. I do not believe that they were talking to one another. I believe that's a cyber myth. And yes, yeah.
Okay.
And the story about the story about I got bigger bombs than you, I've seen that 3 times going through Clearverse. So that means that it was there about 1.5 years ago and it was there again. You know, so I think it's one of those.
It's like a BS thing.
Yeah, it's kind of a BS thing.
But the fact of the matter is that when people point fingers at North Korea because of their weapons, when people point fingers at Iran for their uranium enrichment and how they could be developing a nuclear weapon, if you trace back those fingers, you'll find that they are connected to shoulders which have at their feet a large nuclear arsenal. So all these people who are accusing other countries of developing nuclear weapons have their own nuclear weapons. The problem is you cannot ever have a peaceful world if you're going to think that you're going to run it on a double standard. So that it's okay for us to have nuclear weapons, it's not okay for you to have nuclear weapons. If nuclear weapons are a crime against humanity, they're a crime against humanity no matter who has them. And this is what people have got to get through their heads. The International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War declared years ago, they won the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1985. They said that nuclear weapons are like an addiction. They're like a heroin addiction or any other kind of addiction. They're not so easy to break. And the addict is the last one to realize that he must break it. But he also needs the help of a circle of friends who can support him in kicking that addiction. Canada could be playing a very useful role in trying to get the United States and the Western countries, France and England, to aim towards eliminating the nuclear arsenals. Unless we get a program towards eliminating nuclear arsenals, there's really no hope. Because ultimately, any war in the world, any conflict in the world could turn into a nuclear war.
The non-proliferation treaty is working.
No,
No, it's not, because all it is allowing the nuclear have nations to keep their nuclear weapons and preventing other nations from getting weapons. But anybody can opt out of the non-proliferation treaty on 3 months' notice by simply giving notice, and they can withdraw from it. So it's not enforceable, nor is it intended to be.
Thank you, friends. I think this is the end of our evening. There's a few minutes left for us to chat as we leave the room. And good night to everyone on Zoom.